Welcome to Living Chassidus. Together, let's live the Chassidus we learn.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Chassidus in the morning. 15 minutes to change our lives. Continue on after the Hachana for Gimmel Tammuz. Okay, so let's continue on. We're discussing that what the Rebbe does is that he strengthens our emunah, and we explain there's different levels of emunah. There's emunah on the level of mazloi chazi, that you have a mazla above that sees, it's part of you that sees Elikus, and therefore it's clear. But then there's a deeper level that the emunah, which is the emunah, it's coming from the etzem and neshama. Because your etzem and neshama is mukusheres and atzmus and safe, because your essence of the neshama is connected with Hashem. Therefore, it's because EFshar lachvar, you can't go against, because it's part of you. And ultimately, what we're saying is, what we say in the Maimer is that what the Moshe Rabbeinu, the Raya Mehemna, and the Moshe Rabbeinu of every generation, they bring out that deeper level, that connection we have with Ein Sof. And that's what we're explaining. And for example, when a Yid has the ability to have Mesiras Nefesh and is willing to give up their lives, it's specifically on that level. It's coming from that level. Because Mazlai Chazi, ultimately, is I'm seeing, so I'm separated from that thing, and therefore it's not enough to push me to have actual Mesiras Nefesh. Like the example we gave of the guy seeing his friend with a snake wrapped around him. He didn't have that because that was Mazlai Chazi. He saw it, Al-Kus was real to him, but it's not enough to actually affect him, to actually make him decide to come from. Whereas his friend, the Etzem Neshama was revealed, and he screamed at Shema Yisrael, and that brought it out. Yeah. So in the middle of Ois Vav, page 366 in this sefer, whoever's using it, or whatever else your sefer you're using. Yeah, so here we'll go on the top of the page. Moshe brings down the emunah, the spirit of pnimius, the das asaga, in the level of das and asaga, and really grasping, really understanding it, really connecting with it. It's an outcome. The fact that that's how we have it with pnimius is an outcome of the fact that he feeds and sustains the emunah itself. Meaning that he draws down and he reveals the emunah as it is mitzad etzem neshama. That there's emunah hanging out, so to speak. But what the Rai Mehemna is doing is bringing out the essential emunah that we have, that we're connected with Atzvus Ein Sof, and he's bringing it down. As explained before, the drawing down of the emunah, they should become b'pnimius. It should be connected and not just superficial. It should be internalized. So what's the Rai Mehemna doing? Is connecting, is revealing the essential connection that we have with Hashem. That's why you see, like when you go Mivtzayim, you don't have a philosophical discussion why you should put on tefillin, or why you should light Shabbos candles, or why you should do any mitzvah. Because we don't need to have a philosophical discussion, because we're not trying to tap into its intellectual level, trying to connect with the Etzem Neshama. The Etzem Neshama is one with this. Of course it wants to do it. So now that we have this information, we can say what we're going to say here is a beautiful part. What we're saying is, therefore, in a generation that they had Mesiras Nefesh b'poel, and literally, like the example of Mordechai generation, or like the example we're going to talk later on in the Fidikov's generation, but they had to have Mesiras Nefesh b'poel, that expresses the Rai Mehemna more than Moshe himself. Even though Moshe is the original Rai Mehemna, he's the one that did this. But in Moshe's generation, they didn't have an inyan of Mesiras Nefesh. Whereas in the case of Mordechai, and later on, like we explained, in the case of the Frierdiker Rebbe, they did have Mesiras Nefesh b'poel. This whole vart of the emunah being brought out by the Rai Mehemna is being expressed more so by Mordechai than Moshe. Not that he did a better job, but because the whole inyan of what we're talking about was expressed more in his time. because of the causes of that galus. That's what we're going to explain. Let's see. In generation, they had to have literal Mesiras Nefesh. The offshoot of Moshe, the extension of Moshe, strengthened the Jewish people. As emunah, the Yisrael, Mesiras Nefesh, they'll have Mesiras Nefesh. This gala in the Rai Mehemna, this concept of a faithful shepherd, a shepherd of faith, was brought out even more in this aspect, even more than Moshe himself. Because, like we said, Moshe's generation didn't have to have Mesiras Nefesh to pearl mamish like this. And in Mordechai's generation, they did. Pedicur's generation, they did. Which brings out this concept that the Moshe Rabbeinu of the generation, the Rai Mehemna of that generation, strengthens the emunah. There should be that the etzem and the shama should be revealed to the extent that that you can never go against, and therefore even when it comes to a point of Mesiras Nefesh, mamish, literally to give up your life, you're willing to do it, no problems. Because when you have the revelation and the drawing down of the emunah, as it is coming from the essence of your neshama, yeah. That through which is being brought out through Moshe and the offshoot of Moshe generation, the main revelation of this is by Mesiras Nefesh. And who brought out the Mesiras Nefesh more? Mordechai or Moshe? Clearly Mordechai. He strengthened in his generation. They stood strong. And like we said, from the Alter Rebbe, the Chiddush the Alter Rebbe brings is that if the Yidden would have just denied their connection with Torah Mitzvah, with Yiddishkeit, with Hashem, nothing would happen to them. And none of them had this machshava to even do such a thing. So who gave them that ability? It was Moshe. I mean, it was Mordechai. And that's what we're saying. It's a beautiful part. Yeah. And I think we're going to, yeah, okay. Ois Zayin. Okay. V'hinei. Yedua, it's known, Mesiras Nefesh B'Poel HaTorah Mitzvahs shall call Yisrael. That the Mesiras Nefesh, that in actuality, Torah Mitzvahs was, like we said just now, was specifically in time of Purim by all the Jewish people. Purim, because Purim, it says that Achashverosh ruled Mehut Kush, the whole 127 countries, where all the Yidden were under this rulership. So what happened? The Gezerah was very intense because it was about to destroy all the Jewish people. And the Mesiras Nefesh that the Yidden had was all of them. Unlike in different situations we're going to talk about, let's say like Chanukah, and it wasn't everyone had Mesiras Nefesh. It was so many sons, a few people. But Mordechai gathered all the Jewish people, and that's why he's a good example of it. Like Moshe in his time, that he was a leader of all the Jewish people. And ultimately, we're going to say the Frierdiker Rebbe was also the in a clear way the Moshe, the Rai Mehemna of the previous generation, and ultimately you can say the Rebbe was the Rai Mehemna of our generation, or you can say is, and we'll see how this all. We're sort of leading up to understanding how it worked, this idea, and how it worked until Dar Shishi, and then as we're going to get in the next 2 days, probably we're going to start switching it to what does it mean in our generation, Dar Shvi. And we're going to discuss how it applies to us and how we can learn with it and live with it, and then ultimately be the people that are going to fulfill the mission. Let's see. Yeah, so the main, by Mordechai, is what brought it out was this Indian of Mesiras Nefesh. So Mesiras Nefesh, the Chanukah, because let's say, example for Chanukah. Bisman, that's the Yavan, in the time of the Greek decree, mainly the people that have Mesiras Nefesh wasn't all the Jewish people. It was Matisyahu only sons. We all know the story of Chanukah. And Mesiras Nefesh is Mana Gezerah, Zahaman, Yisrael, whereas the Gezerah of Purim, the decree against the decree for the annihilation of the Jewish people by Purim was all the Jewish people. Now, so context we can explain Mash Mavur Maimed, what the Frierdiker bring on his Maimed from the Medrash. Mordechai Haya Shaku B'Deri Moshe B'Deri. And Mordechai was like Moshe in his generation. Why do we choose Mordechai? Why is he the example? Because we're seeing, because it's obvious. Because Mordechai, he was the right Mehemna for all the Jewish people. Whereas Matisyahu, for example, he didn't strengthen the emunah that all the Yidden have Mesiras Nefesh. He just had him and his sons. We're not saying that he didn't do it. Maybe he did do it, but it wasn't a very clear. We don't see it very clearly from the story. With Mordechai, we do see it very clearly. That even though in every generation we have this Ashtus de Moshe. Because Makkah, nevertheless, is a medrash. It says in the medrash, Mordechai, Dafka, specifically Mordechai, the medrash used as the example. He was used. Why is Mordechai being used? So we can say it's because Shaham Miles, the Mordechai Yehudi Hu Shahu Haya Haraya Mehemna Begalui Shakal Yisrael Shabudere. And he was the Rai Mehemna, he was the faithful shepherd, the shepherd of faith, in a revealed way for his whole generation. But there goes Moshe, Rai Mehemna, just like Moshe was for his generation. No one argues that Moshe was leading the generation. So too with Mordechai was saying, no one argues it was Mordechai. Look what he did. He Unlike in like the story of Hanukkah, which is not that way. Can move on Gami Zesh, just like the generation of Moshe and all the generation. Nikar Der Dea, it was called the generation of knowledge. Elish of Moshe Ayagili Indians So even though you have Moshe and Mordechai, the same archetype type of people, the Rai Mehemna, but the expression of the Rai Mehemna-ness, so to speak, is a very different way. By Moshe, because his generation was called a Derdeya, generation of knowledge. So this emunah that was expressed was in the way of knowledge. But Mordechai reveals that this concept of Rai Mehemna that he feeds and saints of faith is not through the intellect, like Moshe, but it was through the das, it was through the Mesiras Nefesh that he brought out that we all had the Mesiras Nefesh. And this the Rebbe adds, like the kicker, Yesh Leima, we can say the Al Yedei Shemevi Amayim Zeshik also Medrash. That just like the fact that in the Maimon, the Frierdiker brings down this Medrash, that Mordechai in his generation was like Moshe in his generation. Like they said, through doing this, like Bala Maimer Esadin al Atzmoi, he's paskening, he's ruling on himself. That's what the Rebbe is saying. The Frierdiker is ruling on himself. That Shehu Rai Mehemna Begalu Ishkan Sheder. He is the faithful shepherd, the shepherd of faith for his generation. The Rebbe is saying the fact that the Frierdiker brings down in his Maimer, it shows that he is. And you could say Af Shalema. Seemingly, you can say the Rebbe saying it himself. He was also passing on himself that he was the Rai Mehemna, the Gali of the generation. Beautiful, very, very interesting. So just we'll summarize here, and then tomorrow we'll go into Ois Ches. And I says we're gonna continue on discussing a few more points and connecting them, and then we're gonna start to move in Ois Tes to the next, to the meat and bones of how it connects to us. So basically, what we're saying is here. We'll go with the main points of the Maimon that we're talking about so far. So we're saying, on one hand, we have Moshe. He helps us connect with Hashem, and through that we help him. Now we said, how does he help us connect to Hashem? That he reveals a level of connection that we have with Hashem, a das, emunah, which means that we have the emunah, not just the emunah that's mitzad seichel. Not just the munah mitzad mazlai chazi that we have a level within us. We see likus is real, but an even deeper level that it's because we're one with Hashem. It's the essential connection we have with Hashem, and that essential connection we all have is not necessarily brought out. And what Moshe is doing, the Moshe of every generation is bringing that out. And what we're adding, that's the main point. We have to appreciate that we have a Moshe in every generation, and that's what they're doing. They're helping us connect to Hashem and have Mesiras Nefesh to Hashem and understand Hashem. And Hashem will be part of our lives in the realest way possible. And what we're adding here is that, in a certain sense, Mordechai expressed. So the difference between Mordechai and Moshe is that Mordechai in Moshe in his generation expressed it with knowledge, like it was known as Derdeya, generation of knowledge. They understood the likus. Whereas Mordechai in his generation, it wasn't a Derdeya, but it was an Indian of Mesiras Nefesh. And the Mesiras Nefesh is the knowledge that Moshe produced didn't show that essential connection that Yid has with Hashem as much as Mordechai did through the inyan of Mesiras Nefesh. When you have Mesiras Nefesh, you want to give up your life for Hashem. That shows that truest connection you have with Hashem. That's what Mordechai did. And you could say ultimately also the Frierdiker Rebbe, when his generation, that they also had Mesiras Nefesh. And that's what we're saying. And we're saying, and so therefore Mordechai brings it out, this inyan of connection with Hashem, even more than Moshe did. And ultimately, we have to discuss how it works with the Frierdiker Rebbe, and then ultimately us, because ultimately we have to realize how does it all work. Because by us, we didn't have Mesiras Nefesh like they did. We didn't have communist Russia on top of our heads. We have a whole different situation. We live by Chav in America. We live a lifestyle that people would have dreamed of. So how does this all apply to us, and how does it fit with us? And that we'll learn in the next few days. Mr. Hashem, we continue tomorrow. Thank you very much for joining, and everyone have an amazing, amazing day.